Hello friends, I just got done with an amazing interview with Gwen. She's the recycling coordinator at Santa Monica College, and I am so excited to share this information with you. I get a lot of questions about recycling, so I'm really excited to bring someone on to talk a little more in depth about it. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Gwen from Trashy Radical to the ZippNada YouTube channel.
So my name is Gwen, and I go by Trashy Radical on Instagram, where I talk about living more sustainably. And I focus specifically on living towards zero waste, so trying to reduce the amount of plastic that I use and the amount of waste that I send to a landfill each week or month or whatever. And the reason that my focus is in zero waste is that I'm also a recycling coordinator. I work for Santa Monica College, managing their recycling program.
Do you want to start talking about like how to properly recycle? Because I got a question from Caitlin actually on Facebook, and she wants to know she has a hard time figuring out what's recyclable, what's not recyclable. I did a workshop in my community, and we had a group of people, and I was telling them like, hey, you know that triangle under there, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's recyclable, but it's the number. So do you want to like take us through that whole process and how people can figure out what's recyclable and how they can actually recycle properly?
Yeah, so I think the most important thing is that people tend to overcomplicate recycling, and we typically call this wish cycling. And so the moment of being like, oh, this is kind of like paper, or this is kind of like plastic, so maybe it's recyclable. If that's the thought process you have before recycling something, don't recycle that thing. So pretty much the only things that are really truly recyclable, and I'm going to generalize with the understanding that different communities have different rules. And so that is the first step. Thing is that, yeah, you look up your community's recycling guidelines. So literally just search the town that you live in and then the word recycling and then read those directions. But also, I'll give you an overview. Right now in the global market, there's only really a market for plastics number 1, number 2, and number 5. And the only plastic that you should put in your curbside recycling bin is hard plastic. No plastic wrappers, those are never recyclable. Like a chip bag and a granola bar wrapper is not recyclable. And then grocery bags, like plastic bags from grocery stores, produce bags from grocery stores, Ziploc bags, all of that stuff is not really recyclable.
But you can turn plastic grocery bags, right? Okay.
So plastics that are plastic film, so non-hard plastic is called plastic film. And plastic film that has the recycling symbol on it, which is often on grocery bags and produce bags and the stuff that you get from Amazon, like the packaging bubble things. All of that is recyclable plastic. The problem is that at a sorting facility, it can clog the machines that sort recycling. So you don't want to put it in your curbside bin, but you can often take it to a grocery store or other drop-off facilities that will take plastic film. And often you can call your local waste hauler and they will typically have some sort of drop-off option. So you can hoard like a giant bag full of other bags and then drop it off somewhere. And so that's the one way to deal with plastic film. Hard plastics, 1, 2s, 5s are really what the global market is taking right now. And so that's the main thing, is that you should be looking at the numbers on the bottom of your containers. Thankfully, number 1, number 2, and number 5 are the most common like household plastics that you would get from food packaging. Because I think, I don't know what that was, sounded bad. Okay. One of the things that I often tell people is the question is not, is it recyclable? The question is, will my hauler take this and can they make money off of it? Because that is how things get recycled. Hypothetically, everything's recyclable. Like, recycling is just a thing that you do to material.
I mean, it's a business. And people forget that it is a business and that they, at the end of the day, have to make money.
Yeah, and so it's an industry and they're private companies and they need to profit, and that's why recycling is different everywhere as well, because like rural communities right now are really struggling to make a profit with glass. And so a lot of rural communities have stopped accepting glass for recycling, whereas larger cities that are on a coast and have easy access to shipping the material to a different country that will actually buy it, because we don't have a lot of demand in the US for recycling our own material. And so most of it goes to other countries. But like bigger cities will typically take more stuff for recycling because they have more volume, they have easier access to markets, it's just easier to make a profit. Okay, so we covered hard plastics and plastic films. So we're gonna check plastics off the list. So glass is a really complicated one because glass breaks. And the problem with recycling is that it's easier to recycle bigger items. So nothing smaller than 3 inches in diameter is typically recyclable. And just because sorting facilities are not set up well to sort small things. So when glass bottles break, they become small and mix with all of the other small stuff that people put in the recycling bins. And the challenge, of course, for recycling at large is sorting the bin into single streams of one type of material. So what happened with our recycling industry is that we went from a system where you separated everything into different bins and then it was collected separate. And so we called this a multi-stream recycling system. And then we went to a single stream recycling system where you have one blue bin and you can put paper, cardboard, glass, metal, plastic into the same thing. And then that all goes to a facility and then they try to separate it back out into all the different things. And then you're also adding different types of plastic. So that's like extra categories on top of categories. So it's just like a really big mess. And so glass is a challenging one for companies to actually turn a profit off of. Glass often gets reused as a filler for cement and as a filler for other things. It doesn't super frequently get remanufactured into glass bottles as far as I understand, which is a bummer because glass is the only material that's infinitely recyclable and doesn't lose its integrity. So metal is pretty infinitely recyclable, but it doesn't stay as like strong. It gets small impurities in it. So you couldn't like remanufacture a car. You couldn't take a car's metal and recycle it and make a car again because you couldn't trust that it would be as strong and take like the same impact, you know? So that's a problem. And then paper is actually only recyclable up to 3 times before the fibers are too short to bind anymore. So that's why it's like so important that we talk about reduce before recycling and like reuse before recycling, because nothing is really infinitely recyclable. And the recycling industry is like so far from being perfect that I understand why people are concerned about whether or not their material really does get recycled. And then aluminum cans and tin cans, so soup cans, soda cans, all of those are recyclable. Aluminum, tin, glass, what else we got? Oh, paper is a big one. I feel like people are like really optimistic about how recyclable certain things are that are made of paper-esque things. So just because it's paper doesn't mean it's recyclable. Like it has to be just paper. And a lot of times products are paper and plastic. So if it is something that has water resistance to it, then it's not recyclable probably. Like, so for paper, like just like this is made of paper, right? Like this is obviously a recyclable paper. But receipts, like this stuff is not actually paper. And you can kind of tell that if you feel it. It's made of mostly plastic. Receipts have a lot of BPA in them. And I think it's called carbon paper. And so it's literally just not made of paper. It's mixed with a bunch of plastic. So you can't recycle this with other paper, even though a lot of people think you can. And then like, yeah, like all your notebook paper, anything that comes out of a printer. And like books are recyclable as well. Sometimes you have to remove the binding. Like if it's a hardback book, then you need to pull that off before you can recycle the paper in it. But like tea bag wrappers often have plastic lining in them and should not be recycled. I think those are the big ones. But so ideally, if your goal is to get something recycled, pick a material that is made of only one thing. And ideally pick aluminum or tin, like something in a can. Cans are really easy to recycle. They're the product that gets recycled most often. And then also like glass in terms of a health aspect is better, but in terms of recyclability, like plastic is more likely to get separated correctly and recycled again. The problem with plastic is that at best, about 30% of a bottle will get reused just because of how much it downcycles. Like it doesn't keep its integrity at all. And so on average, it's like 10 to 30% of a bottle actually gets remanufactured into something else.
Do you want to explain for people who may not know what downcycling is?
Yeah, so basically it's this idea, like we call it recycling, and people imagine that you put a plastic bottle into your recycling bin and then magically they melt that plastic bottle and it becomes a new plastic bottle. And that's not how it works. They melt it down and then they turn it into plastic pellets typically. And it just loses some of the material through that process. And it's just like waste product. And so there's still plastic going to a landfill even if you are recycling it. But then they turn those pellets into other stuff. It's just not turned back into the same product. Like you can't just keep making the same thing again and again. So the easiest way to think about it is like with paper. If it's only recyclable 3 times, like it is slowly losing its quality over time as you use it. Same with like aluminum and tin. The more you recycle it, the more little air pockets and the more impurities get into the metal. And then it's just eventually not good enough to use anymore. So yeah, we didn't magically make it so that we could infinitely reuse stuff. That is not the reality of the recycling industry. So kind of at the same time that like the recycling industry moved to this single bin system, they also kind of became a lot more lax with what they were telling people for like removing labels and tape. So the recycling industry, to get people to participate more and recycle more because that's how they make more money, started telling people basically that like, oh, you don't really need to worry about the tape and it's kind of okay to leave the labels on the bottle or on the can, and like you can leave staples in and the little plastic windows in the envelope are okay. And like, it is okay. They will take it that way. Is it ideal? No. Because like, what do we know? You can only recycle one type of material. So if you put tape into the recycling bin on your cardboard, somebody somewhere is gonna pull that tape off. So it's better, ideally, if the consumer does that, then the recycling industry would make more money and then it would be a more effective industry. So pulling the labels off of soup cans, pulling the labels off of plastic bottles, pulling tape off of boxes when possible is super ideal, not exactly necessary. That's the easiest way to put it. So the real goal is reducing contamination as much as possible. So honestly, as long as people just stop straight up putting garbage into recycling bins, I would be stoked. Like, don't do that. Don't be that person. Don't put food into the recycling bin. Do not put liquids into the recycling bin, especially if you have a commingled recycling bin. You need to make sure your material is clean, because if liquid and other food material gets on your paper, then your paper is not recyclable anymore. So that's again why moving back to a multi-stream recycling system would be more effective, because if you put all the paper and all the cardboard into their own box or bin and
Now, why did they change that? Was it cost or?
So really it was that like, so when the recycling industry started out in the 70s, it was on a really small scale, and people were really, it was very hands-on. So in order to scale it up, the idea was to make it really easy to recycle. And so people used to be really intimidated by having too many bins to pick from, which sounds funny, but basically people were like overwhelmed by having to make the decision between what bin to put their trash in. So the recycling industry was like, oh, we'll just make it really easy and we'll put everything into the same bin and then we will sort it out. And it worked. People started recycling way more. But then the recycling industry fucking collapsed because they got a lot of garbage. It was a good idea, but the execution was poor. So I guess it's a tangent. But
we talked a lot about, like the recycling, what's recyclable, what you do, which I think is super awesome. As a fellow zero waster, do you have any, like, what are your go-to zero waste tips? Do you want to share like 2 or 3 that people could do to help?
Yeah, my go-to one is that people should just stop buying shit that they don't need. I think that's the most simple way to put it. If you don't buy the thing, then you don't have to worry about whether or not it's recyclable at all. So if you're confused by the recycling rules, just try not producing any waste, and then you don't have to worry about it. So I think that's like the biggest thing, is like thinking about what you actually spend your money on and whether or not it's like what kind of world that creates. And really, I think as long as you just start asking that question with each of your purchasing decisions, then you'll figure out the answer to how to do it better. But the first thing is really just thinking about it. And then I will say, for the recycling thing, like straight up just Google your city and then the word recycling, and then learn how your city wants you to do it. This is a good reminder that we need to be super conscious of our impact on other people.
Thank you guys so much for watching. That's all I have for you today. I'm going to link all of Gwen's information, her Instagram, and her coaching program into the links below, so you can connect with her. Thank you so much. If you have any questions, please message me. I would love to discuss more topics. And thank you all so much for watching. Bye.